The Appalachian mountains are old, older than the bones of the first men who walked their shadowed paths, older than the stories whispered around dying campfires. They are a spine of ancient rock and deep, dark woods, stretching down the eastern side of a continent, a place where the modern world's sharp edges are worn smooth by time, fog, and silence. People talk about the beauty of these mountains, the rolling hills, the misty dawns. But those who have truly been in their depths, far from any road or trail, know that the beauty is just a mask. It is a skin stretched thin over something much older, much darker, and much, much hungrier. Tonight on Mr. Chill Chapters, we are leaving the marked trails behind. We are venturing into the deep woods, into the hollows where the sun never quite reaches the forest floor, and into the stories of those who went in and came out, changed. These are not legends or folklore. These are the true, disturbing accounts of hikers, researchers, and locals who stumbled upon the secrets the mountains keep, secrets that are guarded by more than just silence. You will hear of churches where the only prayer is a terrified quiet. You will learn of plants that don't just grow but consume. And you will meet the things that walk in the fog, things that wear the faces of men but have the eyes of something ancient and predatory. So build up your fire, lock your doors, and listen closely. The woods are calling, and these are the stories they have to tell. Story 1. The Church of the Silent Choir. My name is Dr. Elias Vance. I am a historian specializing in the lost communities of Appalachia. My life's work is to sift through the dust of forgotten towns, to piece together the lives of people who were swallowed by the relentless march of time and the encroaching wilderness. I am a man who finds comfort in old records, in faded photographs, in the silent testimony of abandoned buildings. But in the autumn of 2019, I went looking for a church called the Chapel of Our Lady of Perpetual Silence, and I found a silence that was not peaceful. It was a silence that was caged, and it was starving. The legend of the chapel was a footnote in a dusty county record from the 1880s. It spoke of a small, isolated community deep in the mountains of western North Carolina, a splinter group from a larger religious sect. They called themselves the Silentiaries. Their founder, a charismatic but severe preacher named Father Silas, had taught that the human voice was the devil's instrument, the source of all sin, pride, lies, blasphemy. He preached that true communion with God could only be achieved through absolute, unbroken silence. The community had built a small chapel and a few surrounding homesteads, and then they had simply fallen silent. The county records mentioned them once and then never again. They had vanished from history. For a historian like me, this was an irresistible mystery. What had happened to them? Did they simply die out? Did they move on? Or did they achieve their silent communion in a more permanent way? After months of research, cross-referencing old maps with satellite imagery, I found what I believed was the location of their settlement. A small, unnaturally flat clearing in a deep, inaccessible hollow. A place the locals called Hushwater Holler. The hike in was brutal. There were no trails. I spent 2 days bushwhacking through dense rhododendron thickets and steep, treacherous terrain. The silence in the hollow was profound, heavier than any I had ever experienced. The air was still. No birds sang. No insects chirped. It was a dead, waiting silence. And then I saw it, the chapel. It was still standing, a small, simple stone structure, its steeple a dark finger pointing at the gray sky. It was remarkably well preserved, protected by the deep hollow from the worst of the weather. The door was made of thick, dark wood, and it was barred from the outside with a massive hand-forged iron lock. This was the first thing that felt wrong. Why would a church be locked from the outside? I had come prepared. I had bolt cutters. With a loud, jarring snap that felt like a scream in the oppressive silence, I cut the ancient lock. The iron bar fell to the ground with a clang that echoed through the hollow. I pushed the heavy door open. It swung inward on groaning hinges, revealing the darkness within. A wave of cold, musty air washed over me, carrying a strange, metallic, coppery scent, like old blood. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The interior was stark and simple. Rows of rough-hewn wooden pews faced a simple stone altar. There were no decorations, no stained glass, no religious iconography, just stone and wood. And there were bodies. They were sitting in the pews in neat rows as if still attending a service. There were about 30 of them, men, women, and children. They were not skeletons. They were mummified, perfectly preserved by the cold, dry air of the sealed chapel. They were all dressed in simple, homespun, gray robes, and they were all looking at the altar. Their heads were tilted back and their mouths were wide open, frozen in a silent, eternal scream. Their faces were masks of pure, unadulterated terror. I felt a wave of nausea and fear. What had happened here? A mass suicide? A plague? I forced myself to be a historian, to observe, to document. I walked slowly down the aisle, my flashlight beam moving from one screaming, mummified face to the next. I noticed something strange. Their hands. They were not folded in prayer. They were clenched into tight fists, their knuckles white, their nails digging into their palms. And then I saw the altar. It was not empty. Upon the stone slab there was a single object, a large, ornate, and beautiful music box made of dark, polished wood and inlaid with silver. It seemed completely out of place in the stark, simple chapel. But it was what was behind the altar that made my blood run cold. Carved into the stone wall behind the altar was a single, large, and deeply unsettling symbol. It was a circle, and inside the circle was a stylized depiction of a human mouth, wide open but with the lips sewn shut with thick, crude stitches. And beneath the symbol, a single phrase was carved in Latin, Silentium servat. Silence protects. My mind was racing. This wasn't a vow of silence. It was a quarantine. They weren't keeping their own voices in. They were trying to keep another voice out. My gaze fell back to the music box on the altar. It was the key. It had to be. With a trembling hand, I reached out and touched it. The wood was cold, but it seemed to hum with a faint, latent energy. There was a small silver crank on the side. Against every instinct in my body, I turned it. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence in the chapel deepened, becoming a crushing weight, and then a sound, a single, clear and impossibly beautiful musical note tinkling from the music box. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was a sound of pure, crystalline joy, a sound that seemed to fill the empty spaces in my soul. It was a sound of peace, of love, of absolute perfect harmony. And it was a lie. As the melody began to unfold, a simple, beautiful, and enchanting tune, I felt a change in the room. A pressure. The air grew thick, heavy. The coppery smell of old blood intensified. And the screaming mummies in the pews, they began to vibrate. A low, deep hum emanated from their desiccated bodies, a sound of pure, resonant terror. Their clenched fists tightened, and I could hear the faint, dry crackle of ancient bones as their knuckles strained. The beautiful melody from the music box continued, but now I could hear something else woven into it. A subharmonic, a voice. It was not a human voice. It was a voice that was ancient and vast and utterly cosmically indifferent. It was a voice that spoke in a language of pure mathematics, of impossible geometries, of the cold, silent spaces between the stars. And it was singing along to the music box. The voice was not coming from the music box, it was coming from me. I clapped my hands over my mouth, but it made no difference. The voice was not using my vocal cords. It was using the resonant cavities of my skull, the bones of my chest, my very cellular structure as its instrument. It was playing me like a flute. I understood then the horror of the silentiaries. Father Silas hadn't been wrong. The human body was an instrument. It was a vessel, a perfect resonant chamber for this thing, this entity that existed as pure sound. The music box was not a music box, it was a tuning fork. It was a key designed to tune a human vessel to the correct frequency, to open the door and let the voice in. The silentiaries had discovered it. They had opened the box, and the voice had found them. It had sung through them, and the sound of its song when channeled through a human host was a sound of such cosmic horror that it had driven them mad, freezing them in their final silent screams. Their vow of silence had been a desperate last-ditch attempt to stop it. By not speaking, by not using their own voices, they had tried to make their instruments unplayable. But it hadn't been enough, and their final desperate act had been to lock the chapel from the outside, to turn their place of worship into a tomb, to cage the music box and to cage themselves, the silent, screaming choir, to ensure that no one would ever make the same mistake again. Silentium servat. Silence protects. It wasn't a theological statement, it was a quarantine protocol. The voice in my head, the voice that was using my body, was growing stronger, louder. The beautiful melody of the music box was now just a thin, tinny counterpoint to the vast, terrifying, and majestic symphony of alien thought that was pouring through me. I could feel my own consciousness, my own identity, my sense of self being shredded, dissolved, washed away by the sheer, overwhelming volume of the entity's song. I was losing myself. I was becoming nothing more than a speaker, a biological amplifier for a song that was never meant for human ears. I looked at the screaming faces of the mummies and I saw my own future. With the last vestiges of my own will, I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. I screamed with my own voice, a raw, desperate animal sound of pure terror. I screamed to create a competing frequency, to disrupt the harmony, to throw the instrument out of tune. My scream was a pathetic, fleshy, insignificant sound compared to the cosmic symphony that was playing through me. But it was mine, and it was just enough. The connection wavered. The beautiful, terrible voice faltered for a fraction of a second. In that moment of dissonance, I acted. I lunged forward and I swept the music box off the altar. It fell to the stone floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces of dark wood and twisted silver. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the dead, waiting silence of the hollow. It was a true, perfect, and blessed absence of sound. The voice was gone. The melody was broken. The mummies in the pews stopped vibrating. They were just dead bodies again. I stumbled out of the chapel, gasping, my body shaking uncontrollably. I did not look back. I ran. I ran from that silent, screaming church, from that hollow where the birds never sang. I made it back to civilization, a changed man. I never published my findings. I never spoke of what I found in the chapel of Our Lady of Perpetual Silence. I sealed my notes, my maps, my photographs, and the bolt cutters that had broken the quarantine. I am a historian who is now terrified of history. I am a man who seeks out noise, who cannot stand the quiet. I live in the city, surrounded by the constant, chaotic, beautiful noise of humanity. But sometimes, late at night, when the city falls quiet, I can still feel it. A faint, residual resonance in the bones of my skull. A memory of a melody. And I know that the voice is still out there. It is not gone. It is just waiting. Waiting for another curious fool to find another one of its tuning forks, another one of its pretty silver music boxes, waiting for a new instrument to play. And I pray that I screamed loudly enough to break the instrument that was me, and that I am no longer in tune with its terrible, silent song. Story 2. The Kudzu Man. My name is Liam. I'm a photographer, a storm chaser of a different sort. I don't chase tornadoes, I chase decay. My passion is urban exploration, or urbex as we call it. I seek out abandoned places, factories, hospitals, asylums, homes, and I document their slow, beautiful death. I capture the poetry in peeling paint, the history in a dust-covered child's toy, the silent stories told by a house that is slowly being consumed by time. In the autumn of 2020, this passion led me to the green, suffocating heart of the Appalachian foothills in Georgia, and to a house that was being consumed by something far more aggressive than time. It was being eaten by the kudzu. For those who don't know, kudzu is a vine, an invasive species brought over from Japan. In the warm, humid climate of the American South, it is a monster. It grows at an astonishing rate, up to a foot a day, covering everything in its path: trees, telephone poles, abandoned cars, entire buildings. It drapes the landscape in a thick green blanket, smoothing over the sharp edges of civilization, creating strange, organic sculptures. They call it the vine that ate the South. I was there to photograph it. My research had led me to a specific location, a small abandoned farming community called Green Valley, which, according to old maps, had been completely overrun by kudzu in the 1970s. It was said to be a modern-day Pompeii, but one buried in vegetable matter instead of ash. I envisioned incredible shots: a church steeple poking through a sea of green, the outline of a farmhouse barely visible beneath a thick, leafy shroud. After a long drive down winding country roads, I found it, or rather, I found where it was supposed to be. The valley was a surreal, alien landscape. Everything, as far as the eye could see, was covered in a single, undulating ocean of green. The kudzu had consumed it all. The shapes of trees were now just soft, green mounds. The line of the old road was a gentle depression in the leafy carpet. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. I parked my car and ventured in on foot, my camera ready. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of chlorophyll and damp earth. The silence was profound, muffled by the millions of broad green leaves. It felt like I was walking on the ocean floor. After about an hour of hiking through the green maze, I found what I was looking for: the ghost of a house. It was a 2-story farmhouse, its shape still discernible beneath the thick, suffocating blanket of kudzu. The vines had covered every inch of it, pouring through broken windows, wrapping around the porch columns and pulling the chimney down at a precarious angle. It was the perfect shot. I spent the next hour photographing the exterior, captivated by the struggle between the man-made structure and the relentless vegetative tide. As the sun began to get low in the sky, I decided to try to get inside. I wanted to capture the interior shots to see how the kudzu had invaded the home. I found a window where the glass was long gone and the vines had created a thick, curtain-like barrier. With my machete, I hacked my way through. The vines were thick, woody, and surprisingly tough. It was like cutting through muscle and bone. When I finally broke through, I tumbled into the house's former living room. The interior was a scene of arrested decay. The air was cool and dark, filtered through the green canopy of leaves outside. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but the furniture was still in place. A sofa, a rocking chair, a dining table. It was as if the family had just walked out one day and never returned. But the kudzu was here too. Thick, questing vines snaked across the floor, up the walls, and around the legs of the furniture. They were like green, living tentacles, exploring, tasting, and slowly digesting the house from the inside out. I began to take pictures, my flash illuminating the strange, beautiful, and creepy scene. As I worked my way through the house, I found the family's belongings, a sad collection of abandoned memories. A child's drawing on the wall, half covered by a vine. A pair of reading glasses on a dusty Bible. In the kitchen, plates were still in the drying rack. It was in the master bedroom upstairs that I found the journal. It was a small leather-bound diary lying on a bedside table. It belonged to a woman named Mary Ann, the mother of the family. The last entry was dated June 12, 1974. I sat on the edge of the dusty bed, the green filtered light from the kudzu-covered window falling on the pages, and I began to read. The early entries were normal, the simple diary of a farm wife. She wrote about the weather, the crops, her husband John, and her two young children, Lily and Sam. But as the entries moved into the spring of 1974, the tone began to change. The kudzu, which had always been a nuisance at the edge of their property, began to grow with an unnatural speed and aggression. April 15, 1974. The kudzu is growing faster than I've ever seen. John spent all weekend cutting it back from the fence line, and by Tuesday it was back, thicker than before. It's like a green tide. It feels hungry this year. May 3, 1974. A strange thing happened today. Lily was playing near the edge of the woods, and she said the vines tried to grab her. She said they moved, they reached for her. John told her it was just the wind, but she was terrified. She has scratches on her arm. May 21, 1974. I can hear it at night. A sound, a soft rustling, whispering sound from the kudzu. It's not the wind. It's a different sound. It sounds like breathing, a slow, deep, green breath. John thinks I'm losing my mind. As I read, a chill crept up my spine. I looked at the thick vines snaking through the bedroom, and I could almost hear that same soft, rustling sound. I told myself it was just my imagination fueled by the woman's terrified words. June 1st, 1974. It's in the house. I found a vine in the kitchen this morning coming up through a crack in the floorboards. It wasn't there last night. It grew 6 feet in a single night. John cut it, but when he did, it bled. Not sap. A thick reddish-brown fluid like old blood. It smelled sweet. I looked down at the vine near my feet. I took out my machete, and with a trembling hand I nicked it. A single drop of thick reddish-brown liquid welled up from the cut. It smelled sweet, like rotting flowers. I felt a surge of panic. I should leave. I should get out of this house, but I had to finish the journal. I had to know what happened. June 8th, 1974. Sam is sick. He has a strange rash on his skin, a lacy green pattern like the veins of a leaf. The doctor in town doesn't know what it is. Sam says he can hear the whispers, too. He says the vines are singing to him. He won't stay inside. He keeps trying to go out into the kudzu. June 10th, 1974. John is gone. He went out last night to cut back the vines from the porch. He never came back. I found his axe this morning lying at the edge of the kudzu wall. The axe was covered in the red sap. There was no sign of John. It's just gone. The vines, they took him. The final entry was scrawled in a frantic, barely legible hand. June 12, 1974. Lily is gone now, too. I only turned my back for a minute. The whispers took her. I can hear her voice now, mixed in with the others, calling to me from the green. Calling me to come and play. Sam is not Sam anymore. The green rash has covered his whole body. He doesn't speak. He just sits by the window, staring out at the kudzu with a strange, serene smile on his face. His eyes are green, not the color green. They are the texture of leaves. The whispers are in the house now. They are calling my name. They say it's time to come home, time to be a part of the green. I am so tired. I think I will go and lie down in the garden for a while. It looks so soft, so peaceful. The journal ended there. I closed the book, my hands shaking. This wasn't a story of a family abandoning their farm. This was the story of a family being consumed, digested. I stood up, my camera forgotten. I had to get out, now. I turned to leave the bedroom and I saw him, a small boy standing in the doorway. He was pale and his body was covered in a faint, lacy network of green lines. He was wearing old-fashioned overalls, and he was smiling a strange, serene smile. His eyes were a flat, opaque leaf green. It was Sam. He didn't speak. He just stood there, smiling, and he pointed to the corner of the room. I followed his gaze. In the corner, the kudzu was thickest. The vines had formed a large, dense, pod-like structure about the size of a person. It was pulsing, slowly, rhythmically, like a giant green heart, and from it I could hear a faint, muffled sound. A woman's voice humming a soft, gentle lullaby. It was Mary Ann. She hadn't gone to the garden had come for her. The kudzu had cocooned her, and she was in the process of being changed. Sam, the little green-eyed boy, took a step towards me. He raised a hand, and a thin green tendril, a tiny vine, snaked out from his fingertip, reaching for me. I screamed and ran. I ran out of the bedroom, down the stairs. The house was different now. The vines were thicker, more numerous. They seemed to be moving, writhing, reaching for me. The soft, rustling whisper was a roar in my ears, a chorus of 1,000 voices, all whispering my name. Liam! Joan! Us! I made it to the living room. The window I had come through was gone. It was completely sealed by a thick, impenetrable wall of woven vines. I was trapped. The boy, Sam, appeared at the top of the stairs. He was not alone. Behind him stood a tall man and a little girl, their bodies also covered in the green, lacy patterns, their eyes the same flat leaf green. John and Lily. The family was complete again, and they were all smiling that same serene, terrifying smile. They began to descend the stairs, not walking but gliding, their movements slow and synchronized. They were the gardeners, and I was the new seed. In a panic, I looked for another way out. The fireplace. It was my only chance. It was choked with vines, but there might be a way through. I ran to it and began to tear at the vines with my bare hands. They were tough, and they were slick with the reddish-brown sap. As I pulled at them, they fought back. They wrapped around my arms, my legs, their grip surprisingly strong. I felt a sharp, stinging sensation as tiny, thorn-like structures on the vines pierced my skin. I could feel the whispers in my head getting louder, clearer, more seductive. They were promising me peace, an end to struggle, a connection to a vast, green, collective consciousness, the Great Green. They were promising me a place in the garden. I was losing. My strength was failing. The vines were pulling me down. The smiling, green-eyed family was getting closer. Then my hand, scrabbling in the fireplace, hit something hard and metallic. It was an old, cast-iron fire poker. With my last ounce of strength, I grabbed it. It was heavy and solid and real. It was a piece of the old, dead, human world. I swung it like a club, smashing it into the vines. They tore and the red sap splattered. I swung it again and again, a madman fighting a jungle. I broke through. I scrambled up the chimney, a dark, narrow, suffocating passage, the vines tearing at my clothes and skin. I emerged onto the roof, gasping for air, into the dying orange light of the sunset. The roof was a treacherous, sloping landscape of thick, tangled vines. I could see my car, a tiny metallic speck in the distance. Across the sea of green. I didn't hesitate. I ran along the peak of the roof and I leaped. I leaped out into the green, praying that the kudzu would be thick enough to break my fall. I crashed through the leafy canopy, the vines whipping at my face, and landed in a soft, deep, and terrifyingly embracing cushion of leaves and vines. For a moment I was tangled, caught. I could feel the vines beginning to wrap around me, to pull me down. to welcome me into the green. I fought, I kicked, I clawed, I used the fire poker to tear my way free. I crawled and swam and fought my way through the green ocean, the whispers screaming in my mind. The memory of the smiling, green-eyed family burned into my brain. I don't know how long it took, an hour, an eternity, but I made it. I stumbled out of the kudzu and onto the solid, real, blessed asphalt of the old road. I ran to my car and I drove. I drove until the green hell was just a memory in my rearview mirror. I went to the police. I told them a wild, incoherent story about a house, a family, and a vine that was alive. They sent a search party. They found the valley. They found the place where the house should have been. But there was no house. There was just a massive house-shaped mound of kudzu, thicker and denser than anywhere else. They tried to cut their way in, but they said the vines were as hard as iron and their tools couldn't penetrate it. They found no trace of the family. They found no trace of me ever having been there. They dismissed my story as a hallucination, a bad reaction to a poisonous plant, perhaps. I am a photographer, but I don't photograph decay anymore. I photograph cities, crowds, places filled with life and noise. I cannot stand the silence. I cannot stand the color green, and I have a new scar. On my arm where the vines first stung me, it's a small, faint, lacy pattern, the color of new leaves. And sometimes late at night when I am alone, I can feel it, a faint, slow, rhythmic pulsing just beneath my skin. And I can hear a whisper, a single seductive green whisper in the back of my mind. It's calling me. It's calling me to come home. It's telling me that a part of me is still there in that house, in that valley. A seed has been planted, and the garden is waiting for it to grow. Story 3, The Echoing Mine. My name is Caleb. I'm an audio engineer, but my real passion, my obsession, is sound hunting. I don't record birdsong or whale calls. I hunt for sonic anomalies, for sounds that shouldn't exist. I travel to the quietest, most isolated places on Earth with my parabolic microphones and ultra-sensitive recording gear, searching for infrasound, for electromagnetic fields that have a voice, for the sounds that hide in the static between worlds. In the spring of 2022, this obsession led me and my best friend Ben to the hollows of West Virginia and to an abandoned coal mine known locally as the Devil's Throat. The legend said the mine didn't just echo your voice back at you. It echoed your future. We went looking for a strange sound. We found a place that doesn't just repeat the past, but rehearses the future. Ben was the historian of our duo. While I was obsessed with the how of sound, he was fascinated by the why. He'd found the story of the Devil's Throat in an old miner's journal from the 1930s. The mine had been shut down not because the coal ran out, but because of a series of auditory disturbances that drove the miners mad. The journal described men hearing their own screams for help days before a cave-in, or hearing the weeping of their wives a week before receiving news of a death back home. The mine, the journal claimed, was a place where time had come loose, and sound could travel both forwards and backwards. For us, it was the perfect expedition. Ben wanted the history, the story. I wanted the sound. The hike to the mine was an ordeal in itself. It was located in a deep, forgotten valley, the entrance a dark, jagged mouth in the side of a mountain half swallowed by overgrown forest. The air around it was cold and still and carried a faint metallic tang, the smell of coal dust and deep, damp earth. The entrance was boarded up, but the wood was rotten. We broke through easily and stepped from the bright, living world into a place of absolute darkness and silence. I switched on my headlamp. The beam cut a sharp cone through the black, revealing a rough-hewn tunnel shored up with ancient, rotting timbers. The air was thick, cold, and so still it felt like a solid thing. "Let's get a baseline," I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. I set up my primary microphone, a highly sensitive condenser mic, and put on my headphones. The silence was deafening. There was nothing. No drips, no scurrying animals, no wind. It was a sonic vacuum. "Okay, Ben," I said, "and give me a test." Ben, standing about 20 feet down the tunnel, clapped his hands once, a sharp, loud sound. I watched my monitor, waiting for the echo. 1 second, 2, 3, nothing. The sound had just vanished. It had been completely absorbed by the darkness. There was no echo. "That's impossible," I breathed. "The acoustics in here should be insane. That clap should have bounced around for 10 seconds. Ben looked uneasy. "Maybe the coal dust absorbs the sound." "Not like this," I said, my scientific curiosity now fully engaged. "This is wrong." We ventured deeper. The main tunnel branched into a labyrinth of smaller shafts. The air grew colder and the metallic smell intensified. We were 1,000 feet into the mountain when Ben tried again. He let out a short, sharp whistle. This time, something happened. About 5 seconds after his whistle, we heard it. An echo. But it wasn't his whistle. It was a perfect, crystal-clear recording of my whisper from minutes before. "That's impossible." We froze, our headlamp beams intersecting in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "It was me," I said, my heart pounding. "It was my voice, from back at the entrance." The mine wasn't echoing. It was playing back. It was a natural tape recorder, somehow storing and replaying sounds. But the delay was wrong. The physics was wrong. "This is it," Ben said, his fear giving way to a manic excitement. "This is what the journal was talking about." I should have been excited. This was a sonic anomaly beyond my wildest dreams. But I was terrified. The silence of the mine was not empty. It was full. It was a library of every sound that had ever been made within its walls, just waiting for a trigger to be played back. We continued, drawn deeper by the mystery. We heard more sounds. The crunch of our own footsteps played back to us from a tunnel we hadn't taken yet. A cough from Ben, echoing from a chamber we had just passed. The mine was a chaotic symphony of our own sonic ghosts. We reached a large central chamber, a place where multiple tunnels converged. In the center of the chamber, the miners had left behind a pile of rusted tools and an old, hand-cranked winch. "Let's try something bigger," I said, my fear now replaced by a reckless scientific obsession. I needed to understand the rules of this place. I took a heavy iron mallet from the pile of tools and struck a hanging metal plate that was once part of the winch system. The sound was a loud, resonant gong. It rang through the chamber, a deep, powerful note. We waited. The silence returned. 1 minute, 2 minutes, and then the playback began. It started with the gong, a perfect replica. But then other sounds joined it, the frantic chipping of pickaxes, the rumble of a distant explosion, the terrified shouts of men in a language I didn't recognize, maybe Welsh or Irish, the languages of the first miners who dug this hole. And then a sound that made my blood run cold. A wet, tearing, crunching sound, the sound of a rock fall, the sound of a cave-in. And then the screams. We were listening to the mine's memory. We were listening to the ghosts of the men who had died here 100 years ago. Their final terrified moments recorded and preserved forever in the rock and the silence. Ben was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and academic fascination. "It's a residual haunting," he breathed, "but sonic, not visual. It's beautiful." I didn't think it was beautiful, it was horrifying. We were standing in a mausoleum of sound. The cacophony of the past faded and the silence returned. I was ready to leave. I had my recording, I had my proof, I had my story. "Wait," Ben said, his eyes gleaming in the light of his headlamp. "The journal. It said the mine could echo the future. Ben, no, I said. Let's go. We have what we came for. Just one more test, Caleb, he pleaded. We have to know. Before I could stop him, he stepped to the center of the chamber. He took a deep breath, and he screamed. A long, loud, piercing scream. The scream cut through the silence, and then it was gone. Absorbed. We waited. The silence was absolute. My ears were ringing. 1 minute, 2, 5, nothing. See? I said, my voice tight with relief. It doesn't work. Let's go. Ben looked disappointed, but he nodded. We turned to leave the chamber back the way we came. And that's when we heard it. It started faintly from a dark tunnel to our left, a sound we hadn't made, the sound of scrabbling, of claws on rock, and a low, guttural, hungry growl. We froze, our headlamps snapping towards the sound. The growling grew louder, closer. It was something big, and it was moving fast. What is that? Ben whispered. I don't know, I said, my hand reaching for the only weapon I had, the heavy iron mallet. But it's not a memory. The sound was almost upon us. We could hear its heavy, rasping breaths. We could smell its hot, foul stench, the smell of a predator. And then from the tunnel behind us, the one we had come from, a new sound erupted. A scream, a long, loud, piercing scream. Ben's scream, the one he had just made. The mine was playing it back. But it wasn't just a playback. It was an answer. It was a call and response. The growling from the tunnel in front of us stopped. It was replaced by a series of excited, hungry clicks. And from the tunnel behind us, after the echo of Ben's scream, came a new sound. An answering growl. There wasn't just one of them, there were two. And we were between them. Ben's scream had acted like a dinner bell, a beacon calling them to us. We have to run, I said, grabbing Ben's arm. Now! We plunged into one of the side tunnels, one we hadn't explored, choosing it at random. We ran blindly, our headlamp beams bouncing wildly off the dark, damp walls. Behind us, we could hear them. The sound of their claws on the rock, the sound of their heavy bodies scraping against the narrow tunnel walls. They were hunting us. We ran for what felt like an eternity, our lungs burning, our legs aching. The mine was a maze, a labyrinth of black intersecting tunnels. We were hopelessly lost. We stumbled into another large chamber and collapsed, gasping for breath. I think we lost them, Ben panted. And then the mine played another sound. It was Ben's voice, clear as a bell, but it was a sound he had not made yet. It's a dead end, his voice echoed through the chamber. Oh God, Caleb, it's a dead end. We looked at each other, our faces masks of pure terror. The mine was not just playing the past, it was playing the future. Our future. We scrambled to our feet and ran to the other side of the chamber. There were 3 tunnels leading out. We had to choose. Which way? Ben cried. And the mine answered. From the tunnel on the far right, we heard it. My voice, a sound I had not yet made, a scream of pure, unadulterated agony. We stared at the tunnel, horrified. Not that way, Ben whispered. The sound of the creatures was getting closer again, the clicking and growling echoing from the tunnel we had just come from. We had seconds to choose. The middle tunnel, or the left. And then, the mine gave us its final, most terrible echo. It was a sound that was both familiar and utterly alien. It was the sound of my recording equipment. It was the sound of the high-pitched digital whine of a microphone feeding back, and then the sound of it being crushed, and then silence. A profound and final silence. And that sound came from the middle tunnel. We had only one choice left, the tunnel on the left. We ran into it, praying that it was the way out, praying that the mine had shown us the path to survival by showing us the paths to our deaths. The tunnel was long and it sloped steeply upwards. We could see a faint gray light ahead. The entrance. We burst out into the daylight, into the living, breathing, blessedly noisy world. We didn't stop running. We ran through the forest back to our truck and we drove. We drove until the mountains were just a dark, jagged line in the rearview mirror. We never went back. I destroyed the recordings I had made. Ben burned his copy of the Miner's Journal. We tried to forget, but I can't forget. I am a man who hunts for sound, and I found a sound that has broken me. I can no longer trust what I hear. Every echo, every stray sound, I wonder. Is it the past, or is it the future leaking through? The mine showed us our potential deaths. It showed us the paths not to take, but it also showed us the sound of my equipment being destroyed, followed by silence. It never played the sound of my death. Only Ben's. Ben died 2 years later. A car accident. A head-on collision on a lonely road. The police report said he screamed just before impact. A long, loud, piercing scream. The mine was not just echoing, it was prophesying. It had shown us Ben's death not in the mine but in the world. And it showed me the sound of my equipment being crushed. The sound of my passion, my obsession, being destroyed. And then silence. I don't hunt for sounds anymore. I live in a world of noise, of music, of conversation. I'm terrified of silence, because I know that in the silence the echoes are waiting, and I know that the mind still holds a recording of my future. A future where I scream in agony in a dark tunnel. A future I have so far managed to avoid, but the mind is patient. And it knows that all sounds eventually must be played. And I am left to wonder every day if today is the day that I will finally make the sound that the mine has been waiting to echo. Story 4, The Toll Bridge Guardian. My name is Jesse. I'm a long-distance hiker. For me, happiness isn't a destination, it's the trail itself. It's the burn in your legs, the weight of the pack on your back, and the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breathing in the vast, silent wilderness. I've hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide. I am a man who is comfortable with being alone, miles from any road, with only myself for company. But in the autumn of 2021, on a lesser-known section of the Appalachian Trail in Tennessee, I came to a bridge that wasn't on any map. And I met the man who guarded it. He taught me that some tolls aren't paid with money, and that the heaviest things we carry are not in our packs, but in our minds. I was on a section hike, a 2-week trek through the most remote and rugged parts of the Great Smoky Mountains. The weather had been turning, a cold, persistent rain that had been falling for 3 days, turning the trail into a muddy, treacherous stream. The fog was thick. A dense white wall that swallowed the world, reducing my visibility to less than 50 feet. It was disorienting, isolating, and beautiful. On the 5th day, I came to a place where the trail should have been. According to my map and GPS, the path was supposed to wind down into a shallow valley and cross a small, fordable creek. But the creek was no longer small or fordable. The relentless rain had turned it into a raging brown torrent, a churning, angry river that was easily 30 feet across and impossibly deep. The trail was washed out. I was stranded. I spent an hour hiking up and down the riverbank looking for a safe place to cross. There was none. The current was too strong, the water too deep and cold. To go around would mean a multi-day detour through dense, untracked wilderness. I was beginning to feel a cold knot of real professional fear. I was in a dangerous situation. It was then, through a momentary break in the thick white fog, that I saw it. About a quarter of a mile upstream, spanning the raging river, was a bridge. It was not on my map. It was not on my GPS. It shouldn't have been there. It was an old, beautiful, and terrifying structure. It was a suspension bridge, but one made of rope and dark, weathered wood, the kind you see in adventure movies. It looked ancient, as if it had been there for centuries. It swayed gently in the wind that I couldn't feel, a ghostly, skeletal finger pointing across the abyss. Relief washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. It was a way across. It was a way forward. I made my way to the bridge. As I got closer, I could see the craftsmanship. The ropes were thick, hand-woven, and covered in a strange green moss. The wooden planks were worn smooth by time and countless footsteps. It was a work of art, a relic from another time. At the entrance to the bridge on my side of the river sat a man. He was sitting on a small three-legged stool next to a simple unlit lantern. He was old, impossibly old. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his beard was long and white, and his eyes were a pale, cloudy blue, the color of a winter sky. He was wearing simple, homespun clothes that looked like they belonged in a museum. He was whittling a piece of wood with a small, sharp knife, his gnarled hands moving with a slow, practiced grace. He looked up as I approached, his pale eyes fixing on me. He did not seem surprised to see me. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a dry, rustling whisper like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "Afternoon," I replied, my own voice sounding loud and clumsy in the quiet air. "I didn't expect to see anyone out here. Or this bridge. It's not on my map." The old man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "The map ain't the territory, son. This bridge has been here longer than any of your maps. It's the only way across when the water's high." "I'm glad to see it," I said, my relief making me talkative. "The river's impassable. I was about to turn back." "Aye, the river's angry today," the old man said, his eyes never leaving my face. "But the bridge is steady. It'll see you across for a toll." I stopped. A toll. Of course, it made a strange kind of sense. This old man, this guardian of this secret bridge, he had a right to charge for its use. "Of course," I said, reaching for my wallet in my pack. "How much?" The old man held up a hand, stopping me. "I don't have no use for your paper money, son," he whispered. "The toll for this bridge is different." I paused, my hand hovering over my pack. "What kind of toll?" "A memory," the old man said, his pale eyes seeming to look right through me into the deepest parts of my mind. "A small one, a happy one. That's the price of passage." I stared at him, confused. A memory? Was he crazy? A lonely old man driven mad by the isolation? I don't understand," I said. "It's simple," he rustled. "You want to cross the bridge, you give me a memory. Think of a happy time, a good day, your first kiss, a graduation, the day you got your first dog. Anything. Just hold it in your mind, clear as you can, I'll take it. And you can cross. It's a small price to pay to get out of the rain, ain't it?" This was insane. But I was cold and wet and tired, and the bridge was right there. What was the harm? It was just a game, a lonely old man's strange fantasy. I would play along. "Okay," I said, trying to sound agreeable. "A memory." I closed my eyes. I decided to give him a small one, an insignificant one. I thought of a day from my childhood, a summer afternoon when I was about 10 years old. I had built a small, clumsy model airplane, and I took it to a park with my father. We flew it together. I remembered the feel of the sun on my face, the smell of the cut grass, the pride I felt as the little plane soared into the blue sky. I remembered my father's arm around my shoulder, his laughter. It was a good memory, a simple, happy memory. I held it in my mind, focusing on the details, just as the old man had said. I felt a strange sensation, a cold, gentle pressure in the center of my forehead. It was not a physical touch, it was a mental one. It felt like a cold, dry finger was reaching into my mind, gently, carefully, and lifting something out. It was a feeling of being lightened. The pressure was gone as quickly as it came. I opened my eyes. The old man was smiling, a soft, gentle smile. His pale, cloudy eyes seemed a little clearer, a little brighter. He looked younger, just a little. "Thank you, son," he whispered. "That was a fine one. A good warm day." He gestured with his whittling knife towards the bridge. "The way is open for you." I was shaken. What had just happened? I tried to think of the memory of the model airplane, and I couldn't. I knew that I had had a father. I knew that we had spent time together, but the specific memory, the image of the park, the feel of the sun, the sound of his laughter, it was gone. There was just a blank space, a smooth, empty spot where the memory used to be. It was like a photograph that had been carefully, expertly cut out of an album. I had been robbed. But I had been robbed of something that had no weight, no substance. I felt a profound sense of loss and a profound sense of relief. I was lighter. I looked at the old man. He was already back to his whittling, his head bowed. I didn't say anything. I shouldered my pack and I stepped onto the bridge. The wooden planks were solid under my feet. The rope handrails were steady. I walked across, not looking down at the raging river below, my mind a turmoil of confusion and fear. When I reached the other side, I looked back. The old man was still there, a small, hunched figure on his three-legged stool. But the fog was rolling in again, thick and white, and in a matter of seconds, he and the bridge were completely swallowed by it. When the fog cleared a moment later, there was nothing there. Just the river and the trees and the rain. The bridge was gone. I stood there for a long time, the rain soaking me to the bone. Had I imagined it? Had I hallucinated the whole thing? But I was on the other side of the river, and the memory of the model airplane was gone. I continued my hike, but the joy was gone. The solitude was no longer peaceful. It was just empty. Every time I tried to access a happy memory to comfort myself on the long, lonely trail, I found myself hesitating. Which one could I afford to lose? The rest of the hike was a blur. I made it back to civilization, but I was a different person. I was a man with holes in his history. I became obsessed. I spent months researching, digging through old folklore archives, looking for any mention of a phantom bridge, of a memory-eating guardian. I found nothing. And then I found a story. Not about a bridge, but about a man. An old rambling tale from the 1800s about a man who had made a deal with something in the mountains, something old and powerful. He had been granted an unnaturally long life, but the price was that he could not create new memories. His mind was full. To experience anything new, he had to first make room. He had to give up an old memory. The story said he had become a wanderer, a lonely figure who traded trinkets and stories with travelers, not for the trinkets, but for the new experiences. The new memories they brought, which he would consume to make space in his own mind. The story called him the memory thief. And then, the final chilling piece of the puzzle fell into place. I was looking through an old digitized archive of photographs from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park from the 1930s. It was a photo of a group of civilian Conservation Corps workers building a trail, and in the background, sitting on a rock watching them, was a man. He was younger, but it was him. The same face, the same pale, cloudy eyes, the guardian of the bridge. He wasn't just a lonely old man, he was a creature, a being trapped in a terrible eternal cycle. He was a memory vampire. He lived on the stolen joys of others. The bridge was his trap, his hunting ground. And he appeared only when people were desperate, when they were willing to pay any price to move forward. And I had fed him. I had given him a piece of my past to sustain his endless, lonely present. I think about him sometimes. Is he still there? Sitting on his stool in the fog by his phantom bridge, waiting for the next lost traveler? Is he living on my memory of a summer afternoon? Does he feel the sun on his ancient wrinkled face? Does he hear my father's laughter? And I am left with a terrifying thought. The memory I gave him was a small one, but what if I had been more desperate? What if the river had been wider, the storm worse? What would I have been willing to give? The memory of my wedding day? The birth of my child? The face of my mother? How many pieces of yourself would you trade to get to the other side? I am a hiker, but I no longer seek out the most remote trails. I stick to the well-trodden paths. I am a man who is afraid of bridges, and I am a man who is afraid of his own memories. Because I know that they are not just intangible thoughts. They are currency, they are food, and there are old, hungry things in the deep woods that have been feeding on them for a very, very long time. Story 5. The False Stag. My name is Frank. I'm a hunter, not one of these weekend warriors with a brand new rifle and camouflage gear still stiff from the store. I'm the real deal. I was born and raised in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I've been tracking game in these woods since I was old enough to walk. I know the language of a broken twig, the meaning of a shift in the wind, the story told by a track in the mud. I am a predator, a part of the ancient cycle of life and death that governs these mountains. But in the late fall of 2018, I became the prey. I hunted a stag that was not a stag, and it led me into a part of the forest that was not the forest. It led me into its own personal hunting ground. The story of the ghost stag of Hemlock Peak was a local legend, a tale told by old men in smoky bars. They said there was a massive buck that roamed the highest, most inaccessible ridges. A creature with a rack of antlers so large and complex it looked like a dead white tree on its head. They said it was impossibly smart, that it could vanish into thin air, that it left no tracks. Most people dismissed it as a tall tale, the kind of story that grows with each retelling. But I had seen it. Once. Years ago, through my binoculars, a fleeting glimpse of a magnificent pale stag on a distant ridge, its impossible antlers silhouetted against a blood-red sunset. It was the buck of a lifetime, the king of the forest, and I became obsessed with it. For 5 years I hunted it. Every autumn I would spend weeks alone in the high country, tracking it, learning its patterns. I found its rubbings on trees, scrapes on the ground, signs that no one else had ever found. I was getting closer. I could feel it. In November of 2018, I finally got my chance. A freak early snowstorm had blanketed the high peaks, and I knew it was my opportunity. The snow would make tracking easier. I packed my gear for a 3-day hunt and headed into the deepest, most remote part of the Pisgah National Forest. On the second day, I found its tracks. They were huge, larger than any deer track I had ever seen. And they were fresh. The hunt was on. I tracked it for hours up steep ridges and through dense laurel thickets. The stag was clever. It led me in circles through treacherous terrain trying to wear me down. But I was just as stubborn. The tracks led me into a part of the forest I had never been in before, a deep, narrow valley that was not on any of my maps. The locals called it the Kettle. It was a place with a bad reputation, a place where hunters had been known to get turned around and vanish. The air in the valley was different. It was cold and still and heavy. The trees were ancient and twisted, their branches like gnarled, arthritic fingers. The silence was absolute. And then I saw him. He was standing in a small clearing about 200 yards away. He was magnificent, larger than any deer I had ever seen, with a coat the color of old bone, and his antlers. The legend hadn't done them justice. They were a vast, complex, and terrifyingly beautiful lattice of bone, twisting and branching towards the gray sky. He was standing perfectly still, watching me. He was not afraid. I raised my rifle, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the culmination of 5 years of obsession. I looked through my scope, centered the crosshairs on his shoulder, and I took a breath. And that's when I noticed the first thing that was wrong. His eyes. Deer have dark, gentle, liquid eyes. His eyes, even from 200 yards away, were visible, and they were not dark. They were a pale, intelligent, and chillingly human-like blue. I hesitated, my finger on the trigger. The second thing that was wrong was his stance. He was not standing like a deer. A deer stands with a kind of nervous grace, always ready to bolt. He was standing like a man, his weight planted firmly, his head held high with an air of arrogant, regal confidence. He was not the prey. He was the master of this domain. And the third thing, the thing that made my blood turn to ice, was the sound he made. He opened his mouth and he spoke. It was not a grunt or a snort. It was a single, perfectly articulated word, a word that echoed through the silent valley in a voice that was a low, cultured, and mocking baritone. "Finally," he said. I lowered my rifle, my mind reeling. I was hallucinating. The altitude, the cold, the obsession. It had finally broken my mind. The stag took a slow, deliberate step towards me, and as it moved, its form began to shift. It was like watching a heat haze, a distortion in the air around it. The pale fur seemed to recede, the powerful deer legs began to straighten and elongate. The magnificent antlers seemed to shrink and retract into its skull. The creature that stood before me now was not a deer. It was a man. He was tall and thin and impossibly elegant. He was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned tailored hunting suit, made of a material that shimmered like a deer's hide. His face was long and aristocratic and pale, with the same chillingly intelligent blue eyes. The only remnant of the stag was a faint, branching, tattoo-like pattern on his high forehead, the ghost of the antlers. He smiled, a thin, cruel, and predatory smile. "I must say, Frank," he said, his voice the same cultured baritone, "you are the most persistent one I've had in decades. Most of them give up after a year or two, but you have a true hunter's heart. I do admire that." He knew my name. What are you?" I stammered, my rifle feeling like a useless toy in my hands. "I am the master of this hunt," he said, taking another step closer. "You thought you were hunting my ghost stag? My dear man, the ghost stag is the lure. It is the bait. I send out the story, the image of the perfect, unattainable prize, and I wait. I wait for a hunter with the right combination of skill and pride and obsession. A hunter like you. And then, when you are deep in my territory, when you are tired and alone and your pride is at its peak, then the real hunt begins." I finally understood. The legend of the ghost stag was a trap. A carefully constructed lure for a very specific kind of prey, accomplished hunters. He wasn't the hunted. He was the hunter. And this valley, the Kettle, was his private hunting preserve. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What does any hunter want?" he said, his smile widening. "The thrill of the chase, the contest of wills, a worthy opponent. It has been so long since I have had a worthy opponent." He gestured to the forest around us. "This is my board. You are one piece. I am the other. The rules are simple. You have a rifle and a head start. You must make it out of this valley before sunrise. If you do, you are free to go. You will have won. If you do not." He left the sentence hanging in the cold, still air, the implication more terrifying than any threat. He turned his back to me, a gesture of supreme, arrogant confidence. "Your head start begins now. Frank, run." And I ran. I ran like I have never run in my life. I ran not with the skill of a hunter, but with the blind animal panic of prey. I ran back the way I came, my only thought to get out of this cursed impossible valley. The forest was different now. The familiar paths were gone. The landscape seemed to be shifting, changing around me. The trees were thicker, the terrain more treacherous. The valley was playing with me, herding me, turning me around. I could hear him behind me, not running. He was walking at a calm, leisurely pace. I could hear the soft, confident crunch of his footsteps on the snow. And sometimes I would hear his voice carried on the wind, a soft, mocking commentary on my flight. "A bit to the left, Frank. The terrain is easier there. You're circling. An amateur's mistake. I expected better of you." He was toying with me. He was enjoying this. Night fell, a deep, moonless, starless black. I was running blind, guided only by my compass and my failing hope. I was exhausted, my body screaming in protest, my mind a chaotic storm of terror. I stumbled into a clearing and collapsed, my lungs on fire. I knew I couldn't run anymore. I had to make a stand. I was a hunter. I had a rifle. I found a defensible position, a small outcropping of rocks, and I waited. I listened. The forest was silent. The footsteps had stopped. Hours passed. The cold seeped into my bones. My fear began to give way to a grim, fatalistic resolve. And then I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, a tall, elegant silhouette against the darkness. He was not holding a weapon. "Tired, Frank?" he called out, his voice calm and conversational. I raised my rifle. "Stay back!" I yelled, my voice cracking. He laughed, a soft, condescending sound. "Oh, my dear man, that toy won't help you here. This is not a contest of technology. This is a contest of will, of instinct. Hunter against hunter." He began to walk towards me, slowly, confidently. I fired. I didn't aim. I just pointed the rifle in his direction and pulled the trigger. The roar of the gun was a deafening violation of the silence. The bullet hit him square in the chest. I saw the impact. He stumbled back a step, a look of surprise on his face, and then he began to change again. His body contorted, his limbs elongating, his skin stretching and turning a pale bone white. His elegant hunting suit melted away. The ghost of the antlers on his forehead grew, branching out into the vast, complex, terrifying rack I had seen before. He was no longer a man, he was no longer a stag. He was something in between, a horrifying, impossible fusion of man and beast, a creature of ancient predatory power. It was his true form, the false stag. He let out a roar, a sound that was not deer, not man, but something far older and more terrible. It was a sound of pure, primal, territorial rage. It was the sound of a god whose domain had been violated. He charged. He moved with an impossible, unnatural speed, his massive antlers lowered like a battering ram. I fired again and again and again, emptying my rifle. The bullets hit him, but they had no effect. He was a force of nature, an avalanche of bone and fury. He was upon me. I had a final, fleeting image of his pale blue human eyes now burning with a cold, ancient fire. And then the world exploded in a symphony of pain and darkness. I woke up at the edge of the valley. It was dawn. I was lying in the snow, my body a canvas of bruises and cuts. My rifle was lying beside me, its stock shattered. I was alive. I stumbled back to my truck, my mind a blank, mercifully empty of the details of the final confrontation. I had lost, but he had let me live. Why? I drove back to civilization, a broken man. I sold my rifles. I have not set foot in the woods since. I am no longer a hunter. I am a man who is afraid of the forest. I am a man who understands that he is not at the top of the food chain. I think I know why he let me live. It was the ultimate act of dominance. To defeat a worthy opponent is one thing. But to defeat him and then to let him go, to let him live with the knowledge of his utter and complete inferiority, that is the true prize. He didn't want my life. He wanted my pride. He wanted my identity as a hunter. And he took it. He broke me. He turned me from a predator into prey. And now, I am his greatest trophy, a living testament to his power. So if you are a hunter, and you hear the legend of a magnificent, impossible stag in the deep woods, a prize beyond all others, turn away. It is a lie. It is a lure. You are not the hunter. You are the entertainment. And the master of the hunt is waiting for you in a valley that is not on any map. And he is very, very patient. Story 6. The Whispering Well. My name is Anna. My husband, Mark, and I were city people through and through. We lived in a world of concrete, steel, and the constant reassuring hum of traffic. But we dreamed of escape. We dreamed of a small farmhouse, a piece of land, the quiet life. In the spring of 2022, we found it. A beautiful, dilapidated old farmhouse on 50 acres of rolling hills in rural Virginia, right at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was perfect. It was our dream. But our dream came with a well. And that well was not just a source of water. It was a source of poison, a poison that fed on secrets and turned love into a weapon. The house was a fixer-upper, and we poured all our love and energy into it. We stripped the floors, plastered the walls, and slowly the old house began to breathe again. The property was idyllic, a sprawling meadow, a stand of old-growth oak trees, and a small, clear stream. The only unsettling feature was the old well. It was in the backyard, about 100 feet from the house. It was a classic fieldstone well, about 4 feet high, with a heavy, weathered wooden lid. The real estate agent had told us it was capped and had been out of use for decades. The house had been on county water for years. Mark wanted to fill it in, for safety. But I found it charming, a piece of the property's history. I argued to keep it, maybe turn it into a planter. We compromised and left it as it was, a silent stone sentinel in our new backyard. The whispers started about a month after we moved in. It was a warm evening, and I was sitting on the back porch, enjoying the sunset. A faint sound drifted on the breeze, a soft, sibilant, hissing sound, a whisper. I couldn't make out any words. I assumed it was the wind in the leaves of the old oak trees. But it happened again the next night, and the next. It was always the same, a soft, indistinct whisper coming from the direction of the well. I mentioned it to Mark. He listened, but he couldn't hear it. "It's just the wind, honey," he said, kissing my forehead. "Or maybe the house settling. This old place is full of strange noises." I tried to believe him, but the whispers became more frequent. And they began to change. They were no longer just a soft hissing sound. They were beginning to sound like a voice, a low, conspiratorial, and deeply intimate voice. One evening I was weeding the garden near the well. The whispering was clear, and this time I heard a word, my name. "Anna," it hissed, the sound seeming to come from the very air around the well. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I looked around. The yard was empty. Mark was in town. I was alone. "He doesn't love you, Anna," the voice whispered, as clear as if someone was standing right behind me. "Not the way you think he does." I dropped my trowel and ran back into the house, my heart pounding. I locked the door. I was shaking. I had to be imagining it. Stress. The isolation of country living. It had to be. But the well was not finished with me. The whispers began to follow me. I would hear them in the house when I was alone. A faint hissing voice coming from the pipes, from the drains. The house's water system, I realized with a jolt of horror, was connected to the same underground springs that fed the well. The well had found a way inside. It started to tell me things. Terrible, poisonous things. "He was late coming home last night, wasn't he, Anna?" It would whisper from the kitchen sink. "He said he was working late." He was lying. Did you see the way he looked at the waitress in town today? He wants her. He thinks you're weak, Anna. He thinks you're foolish for giving up your city life for him." The whispers were insidious. They were my own deepest, darkest insecurities given a voice. They were the little fears that every person has in a relationship, amplified and twisted into monstrous certainties. I tried to fight it. I knew it wasn't real, but the poison was seeping in. I started to watch Mark with suspicion. A late night at work, a friendly smile to a stranger, a moment of quiet distraction. Everything became evidence. The well was building a case in my mind, and it was a very convincing prosecutor. Our dream home became a place of tension and silent accusations. We started to argue, something we had never done before. Our conversations became clipped, cautious. The love and trust that had been the foundation of our relationship were being eroded, one poisonous whisper at a time. What I didn't know was that the well was talking to Mark, too. I found out one night during a terrible fight. I had accused him of something the well had whispered to me, something about a woman from his past. He denied it, his face a mask of hurt and confusion. "Why are you doing this, Anna?" he cried. "Why are you trying to destroy us?" "I'm not," I shouted back. I'm hearing things." His face went pale. "What things?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The well," I sobbed. "It talks to me. It tells me things about you." Mark stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning shared horror. "The well talks to you too?" he breathed. And then his story came tumbling out. He had been hearing the whispers for weeks, but the whispers he heard were different. "She regrets moving here, Mark," the well had told him. "She blames you. She thinks you've trapped her. She's still in love with her ex-boyfriend. She talks to him when you're not home. She thinks you're a failure, Mark. She's disappointed in the man you've become." We stood in our beautiful restored farmhouse, two strangers staring at each other across a chasm of lies that we had both started to believe. The well had not just been whispering to us. It had been whispering about us to each other. It had been playing us like puppets, turning our love into a weapon against ourselves. It was a parasite. A psychic parasite that fed on doubt, on suspicion, on the slow, agonizing death of love. It was a creature that lived in the dark, wet places, and it fed on broken hearts. We held each other then, weeping with relief and horror. The spell was broken. We knew the truth. The enemy was not each other. The enemy was in our backyard. "We have to destroy it," Mark said, his voice grim. The next morning we went to war. We gathered every tool we had, sledgehammers, pry bars, bags of concrete. As we approached the well, the whispering started, louder and more frantic than ever. It was no longer a single voice. It was a chorus of 1,000 hateful, desperate whispers, all speaking at once, a cacophony of psychic venom. "She's lying. Mark, she's manipulating you. He's going to leave you, Anna. He's just pretending. You can't trust him. You can't trust her." We ignored it. We put in earplugs, but it made no difference. The voices were not in our ears. They were in our heads. Mark took the sledgehammer, and with a roar of rage, he swung it at the stone wall of the well. The stone cracked. The whispers turned into a scream, a high-pitched, psychic shriek that made our teeth ache and our noses bleed. The air grew cold. The sky darkened. We kept working. We smashed the stone walls, breaking the ancient circle. We pried off the heavy wooden lid, and we looked inside. The well was deep and dark and filled with a black, stagnant water. But it was not just water. Floating in the darkness were things, pale, ghostly, and translucent shapes like jellyfish made of pure memory. They were the whispers. They were the lies. They were the stolen secrets and the broken hearts of every person who had ever lived on this land, every person who had ever drunk from this well. It was a well of sorrow, and at the bottom of the well we could see it, the source. It was not a creature, it was a rock, a single large black and oily-looking rock veined with a strange pulsing purple light. It was a geological anomaly, a psychic lodestone, a natural antenna for the darkest parts of the human soul. It didn't create the lies. It simply listened to our own deepest fears, and it whispered them back to us, amplified and validated. "The concrete!" I yelled over the psychic screaming. We worked together, heaving the heavy bags of concrete mix to the edge of the broken well. We tore them open and we poured the dry, gray powder into the dark water. The well screamed. The black water churned and boiled as the concrete hit it. The pale, ghostly shapes writhed and dissolved. The black rock at the bottom pulsed with a furious, dying purple light. We poured bag after bag until the well was full, until the black water was a thick gray sludge, until the psychic screaming faded to a final, hateful whisper. And then, to silence. A true, clean, and beautiful silence. We stood there, covered in sweat and concrete dust, holding each other as the sun broke through the clouds. We sold the farmhouse a month later. We couldn't stay. The dream was tainted. We moved back to the city, back to the world of concrete and steel. We are happy now. Our love is stronger than ever. We survived the well. We learned that the greatest monsters are not the ones with claws and teeth. They are the ones that find the cracks in your heart and whisper their poison into them. But I still have nightmares. I dream of a deep, dark well, filled with black water. And I dream of the whispers. And sometimes when I am alone, when the house is quiet, I can hear it, a faint, distant hissing sound coming from the pipes. And I know that the well is gone. But the water is everywhere, and it remembers. Story 7, The Children of the Fog. My name is David. I'm a park ranger. I've worked in some of the most beautiful and remote national parks in the country. I'm a man who is comfortable with solitude, with the vast, silent indifference of nature. I've faced down bears. I've survived blizzards. I've rescued lost hikers from the brink of death. I thought I had seen it all. But in the autumn of 2017, I was temporarily assigned to a small, overlooked section of the Nantahala National Forest. And I learned that there are some things in the woods that you can't fight, that you can't rescue, and that you can't escape. Because they are not in the woods. They are the woods. The area I was assigned to was a place the locals called the Merk. It was a deep, isolated river valley famous for one thing: a perpetual and unnaturally thick fog. The unique topography and the cold river created a temperature inversion that trapped a dense white fog in the valley almost year-round. It rarely, if ever, burned off completely. It was a beautiful, eerie, and disorienting place. And it had a history. People got lost in the Merk, not just hikers. Experienced locals. People who had lived in the area their whole lives. They would walk into the fog and they would simply not walk out. The official explanation was always the same. They became disoriented in the low visibility, fell into a ravine, or succumbed to exposure. But the old-timers had another story. They said the fog was hungry. They said it took people. My job was simple. Patrol the perimeter of the Merk, maintain the trails that led into it, and warn any hikers about the dangers of the fog. For the first few weeks, the job was quiet, almost boring. I would hike the trails, replace a few trail markers, and enjoy the strange, muffled, peaceful silence of the foggy woods. The fog was a constant companion. It was like living inside a cloud. It played tricks on the eyes, turning familiar shapes into strange, monstrous forms. A gnarled tree would look like a hunched figure. A patch of moss would look like a face. I was used to it. It was just the fog. The strangeness began on a Tuesday afternoon. I was about a mile down a trail that led into the heart of the murk, checking a footbridge over a small creek. The fog was particularly thick that day, a solid white wall that reduced my visibility to about 10 feet. The world was a small, gray, muffled circle. And then I heard a sound, the sound of children laughing. It was a soft, distant, joyful sound, the sound of a group of kids playing a game. It was a sound that had no place here in the middle of a national forest miles from any town or playground. I froze, listening. The laughter came again, closer this time. It was followed by the sound of running footsteps, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves. My first thought was that a family of hikers was lost. I unclipped my radio from my belt to call it in. "Ranger Dispatch, this is Ranger Miller. I have possible lost hikers, including children, in the Murk Valley area, proceeding to investigate." "Copy that, Miller," the voice on the radio crackled back. "Be advised, we have no reports of any overdue hikers in your sector." I followed the sound of the laughter, my hand resting on the canister of bear spray on my belt. The sounds led me off the trail deeper into the woods. The fog was so thick I could barely see my own feet. I was navigating by sound alone. "Hello?" I called out. "Park Ranger, is anyone there?" The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was sudden and absolute. "Hello?" I called again. "If you're lost, I can help you." A small voice, a little girl's voice, answered from the fog just a few feet in front of me. "We're not lost," she said. "We're playing." A figure began to resolve out of the thick white mist. It was a little girl, about 7 or 8 years old. She was wearing a simple, old-fashioned-looking dress, the kind you see in sepia-toned photographs from 100 years ago. Her feet were bare despite the cold, damp ground. She had long, dark hair, and her eyes were wide and curious. "You shouldn't be out here alone," I said, my voice gentle. "Where are your parents?" "They're gone," she said, her voice simple and matter-of-fact. "The fog took them." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "What's your name?" I asked. "Lily," she said. "Do you want to play with us?" "Us?" I asked. And then more figures began to emerge from the fog. One by one they appeared, stepping out of the white wall of mist. There were about a dozen of them. Children, all ages, from toddlers to teenagers. And they were all dressed in the same old-fashioned, out-of-time clothing. A boy in overalls, a teenage girl with her hair in braids, a small boy holding a single, perfect red autumn leaf. They formed a silent semicircle around me, their faces pale, their eyes wide and watchful. They were not threatening. They were just there. "Where did you all come from?" I asked, my voice tight. "There's no town for miles." "We live here," said a teenage boy who seemed to be the oldest. "In the fog." This was wrong. This was all wrong. These were not lost hikers. This was something else. "We're playing a game," Lily, the little girl, said again. She was smiling, a sweet, innocent smile. "It's called hide and seek. Do you want to play?" "I think I need to take you all back to the ranger station," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and authoritative. "It's not safe for you out here." The teenage boy shook his head. "We can't leave the fog," he said, his voice patient, as if explaining something very simple to a very stupid adult. "We are the fog." And as he said it, the edges of his form began to soften, to blur. The lines of his body, his clothes, they began to lose their definition, to dissolve and merge with the thick white mist around him. For a horrifying second, he was no longer a boy. He was a boy-shaped cloud. I stumbled back, my hand fumbling for my bear spray. "Don't be afraid," Lily said, her own form beginning to shimmer and lose its shape. "It doesn't hurt." The other children were doing it too. They were all dissolving, their solid forms becoming ethereal, translucent. their edges bleeding into the white, swirling mist. They were like watercolor paintings in the rain. "The game is simple," the teenage boy's voice said, now coming not from a single point but from the fog itself, from all around me. "We hide. You seek. If you find us, you win." "And what if I lose?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The laughter came again, but it was different this time. It was not joyful. It was a cold, echoing, and ancient sound. It was the sound of the fog itself, laughing. "If you lose," the chorus of whispering, foggy voices said, "you get to hide with us forever." And then they were gone. The figures had completely dissolved. I was alone again in the silent, white, muffled world of the fog. I ran. I ran back towards the trail, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back. I could feel their presence all around me in the swirling mist, in the cold, damp air. I could hear their faint, distant laughter, a sound that was both everywhere and nowhere at once. I made it back to the trail and then to my truck. I drove back to the main ranger station, my mind a screaming chaos. I filed a report, an incoherent, rambling report about ghost children in the fog. My supervisor, a kind, pragmatic man named Henderson, listened patiently. When I was finished, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You met the children of the fog, son," he said, his voice heavy. "They're real," I asked, desperate for validation, for proof that I wasn't going insane. "As real as these mountains," Henderson said. He opened a locked file drawer and pulled out a thick, old, leather-bound folder. The label on it read simply, "The Merc." He opened it. It was filled with old, handwritten reports from other rangers going back over 100 years. They all told the same story. Encounters with strange, old-fashioned children in the fog. The same game of hide and seek. The same warning. And the folder was also filled with missing persons reports, dozens of them. Hikers, hunters, locals, even a park ranger from the 1950s. All of them had vanished without a trace in the murk. "They are the lost ones," Henderson explained, his voice low. "The ones the fog took. They are the souls of everyone who ever got lost and died in that valley. They are not ghosts. They have become a part of the fog itself. They are a kind of collective consciousness, a genius loci, the spirit of the place." "But they were so real," I said. "They can be," Henderson said. "They can take form, solidify out of the mist. They are lonely, they want new playmates, so they play their game, hide and seek. But it's a game you can't win." "Why not?" I asked. Because they cheat," Henderson said, his eyes dark. "They are the fog. They can be anywhere, everywhere. They can see you, but you can't see them. The only way to win is not to play." He told me that the ranger who had disappeared in the 50s had been a young, idealistic man much like myself. He had encountered the children and he had decided he was going to rescue them. He went into the murk to find them, to lead them out. He was playing their game. He was seeking. And he was never seen again. He had lost. And he had become one of them. I was transferred out of the murk the next day. Henderson said I had seen too much, that the children now knew me, that they would be interested in me. He said they would call to me, that I would hear their laughter on the wind, that I would feel their pull. He was right. I work in a different park now, a sunny, dry park in the west. But sometimes on foggy mornings I can hear it, a faint, distant echo of children's laughter. And when I close my eyes, I can see them. Lily, and the boy in the overalls, and the teenager with the patient, ancient eyes. They are standing in the white mist, and they are smiling, and they are waiting. They are waiting for me to come back and play. I am a park ranger. I am a man of science and reason. But I know that there are places in this world where the rules are different, where the weather is not just weather, but a living, thinking entity. where the fog is not just a cloud on the ground but a cemetery of lost souls. And I know that the most dangerous game in the world is not played with a board or with cards. It is played in a place of thick white silence. And it is a game of hide and seek, where the only prize for losing is an eternity of being lost. Story 8. The Bloodroot Harvest. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. I am a botanist, an ethnobotanist to be precise. I don't just study plants. I study the relationship between plants and people. I travel the world seeking out remote communities that have ancient, traditional knowledge of the medicinal and spiritual properties of the plants that grow around them. I am a man who believes that the forest is the world's oldest and wisest pharmacy. In the spring of 2023, my research led me to a remote corner of the Appalachian Mountains in Kentucky in search of a legendary plant, a rare and supposedly magical variety of Sanguinaria canadensis, the bloodroot. The common bloodroot is a real plant. It's a beautiful, ephemeral spring flower, and when you break its root, it bleeds a bright, reddish-orange sap. Native American tribes used it for centuries as a dye and for various medicinal purposes. But the legends I was chasing spoke of a different kind of bloodroot, a variety found only in one specific hidden valley. This true bloodroot, the stories said, had miraculous healing properties. It could cure any disease, mend any wound, even reverse the aging process. But the legends also came with a dark warning. The true bloodroot was not a wild plant. It was cultivated, and its cultivation required a terrible price. After months of searching through obscure historical texts and folklore archives, I found a lead, an old hand-drawn map in the journal of a 19th-century preacher, who had stumbled upon a hidden community that he called the Sanguine Brethren. He described them as a healthy, vibrant, and unnaturally youthful people who worshipped the bloodroot and guarded its secrets jealously. The map was crude, but by cross-referencing it with modern topographical surveys, I was able to pinpoint the probable location of their valley, a place the locals called Crimson Hollow. The journey into Crimson Hollow was arduous. It was a deep, narrow valley surrounded by steep, impassable ridges, accessible only by a single, treacherous, and unmarked trail. As I descended into the valley, the forest changed. The trees were older, larger, and healthier than any I had ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. The entire valley floor was a carpet of lush green ferns and vibrant, exotic-looking wildflowers. It was a botanist's paradise. After several hours of hiking, I found the community. It was a small, idyllic village of about a dozen simple, well-kept log cabins nestled by a clear, fast-flowing stream. The people who came out to greet me were just as the preacher's journal had described. They were beautiful, men and women, who by the look of their hands and the style of their homespun clothing should have been old, had the smooth skin, bright eyes, and vibrant energy of people in their 20s. They were healthy, strong, and radiated an aura of serene, almost unnerving vitality. Their leader, an elder named Hezekiah, greeted me. He had the wise, ancient eyes of a man who had seen 100 winters, but the unlined face and strong body of a man of 30. "You are a long way from home, stranger," he said, his voice calm and melodic. "I am a botanist," I explained, "a student of plants. I have come to learn. I have heard legends of a special flower that grows in this valley." Hezekiah smiled, a knowing, gentle smile. "You have heard of the true bloodroot," he said. "You are not the first. Many have sought it. Few have found our valley." I was honest with them. I told them of my research, of my belief that the traditional knowledge of communities like theirs held the key to modern medicine. I did not speak of my desire for a sample, only of my desire for knowledge. They were cautious but welcoming. They invited me to stay, to share their food, to observe their way of life. For a week, I lived among the sanguine brethren. It was a utopian existence. They lived in perfect harmony with nature. They were kind, peaceful, and deeply spiritual. Their lives revolved around the cultivation of the true bloodroot. The fields of bloodroot were in the center of the valley, a breathtaking sight. Acres and acres of the beautiful white star-like flowers, their petals delicate and translucent. The brethren tended to the fields with a reverence that was almost worshipful. They sang to the plants, they spoke to them, they treated each one as a sacred being. Hezekiah, seeing my genuine fascination, began to share some of their secrets with me. He explained that the true bloodroot was not just a plant. It was a symbiotic organism. It had a consciousness, a collective intelligence that they called the red. He said that by consuming the root, they entered into a communion with the red, and it, in turn, healed them, sustained them, and granted them their long, youthful lives. The red is a gift from the earth, Hezekiah explained as we walked through the fields of white flowers. It is the life force of the valley made manifest. It cleanses us, and in return we serve it. We are its gardeners. I was captivated. This was beyond my wildest dreams. A plant with a collective consciousness? A symbiotic relationship that granted eternal youth? This was a discovery that would change the world. I asked if I could see the root itself. Hezekiah hesitated. The root is sacred, he said. It is only handled during the harvest, and the harvest is a holy time. When is the harvest? I asked, my scientific curiosity burning. Soon, he said, his eyes turning towards the setting sun. Very soon. The flowers are at their peak. When they begin to fade, it will be time. My desire for a sample was becoming an obsession. A single root, a piece of the plant's DNA, could revolutionize medicine. I had to have it. That night I decided to take one. I waited until the village was asleep. I crept out of the guest cabin and made my way to the fields under the light of a full moon. The fields of white flowers were glowing, almost ethereal in the moonlight. I chose a plant at the edge of the field. With a small trowel, I carefully began to dig around its base. The soil was rich and dark and strangely warm. As I dug, I uncovered the root. It was just as the legends described. It was thick and gnarled, and when I accidentally nicked it with my trowel, it bled. A thick, viscous, and shockingly bright crimson sap, the color of fresh, arterial blood, welled up from the cut. I carefully worked the root free from the soil. It was about a foot long, a complex, branching, almost humanoid shape. I wrapped it in a piece of cloth and placed it carefully in my pack. I had what I came for. I would leave in the morning before they discovered what I had done. As I stood up to leave, I felt a change in the air. The gentle humming silence of the valley was gone. It was replaced by a new silence, a cold, watchful, and deeply angry silence. I looked at the field of flowers. They were no longer just flowers. They were all turned towards me. Every single one of the thousands of white, star-like blossoms had swiveled on its stem to face me. They were like a million pale, unblinking eyes, all staring at me with a cold, silent accusation. The red knew what I had done. I had stolen a piece of its body. I ran. I ran back to my cabin, my heart pounding. I barricaded the door. I sat in the darkness, clutching my pack, listening. And then, the singing started. It was not the gentle, melodic singing of the brethren. It was a different song, a high-pitched, keening, and deeply sorrowful sound. It was the sound of the plants themselves, the sound of the bloodroot weeping for its stolen child. The sound was coming from the fields, and it was a sound of pure collective grief. The singing continued all night. I did not sleep. The next morning I prepared to leave. I packed my things, my hands shaking. The singing had stopped. The valley was silent again. but it was a heavy, menacing silence. I opened the door of my cabin. Hezekiah was standing there. He was not alone. Every member of the community, every man, woman, and child was standing with him. They formed a silent human wall blocking my path. They were no longer smiling. Their faces were grim, their eyes cold. "You have broken our trust, Dr. Thorne," Hezekiah said, his voice no longer melodic, but flat and hard as stone. "You have stolen from the Red. You have committed a great sacrilege." "I am a scientist," I stammered. "This discovery could save millions of lives." "You are a thief," Hezekiah said, "and there is a price for theft in this valley. The Red is life, but it must be fed. Its soil must be nourished. That is the other part of our communion. That is the secret you were not yet ready to learn." He gestured to the fields behind him. "The true bloodroot does not grow in simple earth, Doctor. It grows in a very specific, very rich soil. A soil that must be replenished." I didn't understand. Replenished with what? Hezekiah's eyes were filled with a terrible, ancient sorrow. "We are the gardeners," he said again, "but we are also the soil. When one of us grows old, when our communion with the Red weakens, we give ourselves back to it. We become the soil from which new life springs. It is the final, most sacred part of the cycle." I stared at him in horror. They weren't just eating the root. They were becoming the root. It was a cycle of ritualistic, symbiotic cannibalism. "But you are not one of us," Hezekiah continued, his voice heavy with a grim finality. "You are an outsider, a thief. You cannot be given back to the Red in the sacred way. Your theft has created an imbalance. A debt has been incurred, and the debt must be paid." "What are you going to do?" I whispered, my body trembling. "The harvest is today, Doctor," Hezekiah said. "The Red is hungry. It requires a special nourishment this year. A supplemental feeding, to pay for what was taken." He stepped aside. The silent, grim-faced community parted, creating a path. The path led to the fields. In the center of the fields, a deep, freshly dug pit was waiting, and beside the pit the brethren were sharpening their knives. Not metal knives. Knives carved from the hard, woody, blood-red roots of their sacred plant. They were not going to kill me. They were going to plant me. I was to be the new soil. My body, my life, my very essence would be the price for the single root I had stolen. I would become the fertilizer for the next generation of the true bloodroot. I screamed and tried to run, but they were strong. So unnaturally, vibrantly strong. They dragged me kicking and screaming towards the fields of silent, watching, and hungry flowers. I am Dr. Aris Thorne. I am a botanist, and I have learned the final, terrible secret of the true bloodroot. I have learned that the most beautiful flowers often grow in the darkest soil. And I have learned that when you take something from the ancient sacred places of the earth, it will always, always take something back. This story is not being written with a pen. It is being written with the last fading embers of my consciousness. I am in the dark, warm earth. I can feel the roots, my roots, spreading out, seeking nourishment. I can feel the collective consciousness of the Red, a vast green and crimson ocean washing over me, dissolving me, making me a part of its eternal, hungry life. I can hear the brethren singing to me. They are singing a lullaby of growth, and I can feel a new, small green shoot pushing its way up from my chest, reaching for the sun. It will be a beautiful flower, and its root will be very, very red. Story 9. The Fire Tower Watcher. My name is Ben. For 2 summers I worked what many would consider a dream job, a fire lookout in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. My home was a small 14 by 14-foot cabin perched on top of a 100-foot steel tower on a lonely peak called Black Balsam Knob. My job was simple: to watch, to scan the endless rolling sea of green and blue mountains for the first faint wisp of smoke. It was a job of profound isolation. For weeks at a time, my only companions were the wind, the hawks, and the distant crackling voices on the radio. I was the eye in the sky, the silent guardian of the forest. But in my second summer, the summer of 2019, I learned that I was not the only one watching. And the thing that watched with me was not looking for fire, it was looking for me. The life of a fire lookout is a strange paradox. You are on top of the world, with a 100-mile view in every direction, but your own world is a tiny glass-walled box. You are a king on a throne of steel and wood, ruling over a vast, silent kingdom. It's a life that attracts a certain kind of person, the solitary, the contemplative, the ones who are running from a world that is too loud. I was one of those people. My tower was an old one built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. It was a beautiful, rickety, and slightly terrifying structure. On windy days, the whole tower would sway and the steel would groan and sing like a living thing. The cabin at the top was my sanctuary. It had a bed, a small desk, a wood-burning stove, and the all-important Osborne fire finder, a circular map used to pinpoint the location of a smoke sighting. The first summer was idyllic. I fell into the rhythm of the mountains. I watched the sunrises paint the peaks in shades of orange and pink. I watched the thunderstorms roll in from the west, great, dark, bruised-looking clouds that unleashed their fury on the valleys below. I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The strangeness began in my second summer. It started subtly. Things would be moved in my cabin while I was out on the catwalk, the narrow walkway that encircled the cabin. A book left open to a different page. My logbook, where I recorded my daily observations, would have a faint, smudged fingerprint on it that wasn't mine. I told myself it was the wind, or my own forgetfulness. The isolation I knew could play tricks on the mind. Then came the gifts. One morning I woke up to find a single perfect white quartz crystal sitting on the railing of the catwalk right outside my door. It hadn't been there the night before. It was beautiful, a perfect six-sided crystal, cool to the touch. I thought maybe a hiker had left it, a friendly gesture. But my tower was miles from any public trail, and the gate to the access road was locked. No one should have been able to get up here. A few days later, another gift appeared. A small, intricate bird's nest woven not just with twigs and grass, but with strands of what looked like human hair. Black and gray and blonde. It was unsettling, but I tried to rationalize it. A strange bird. A coincidence. The gifts became more frequent and more bizarre. A perfectly preserved dragonfly wing. A circle of smooth gray river stones arranged in a spiral pattern. A single large black crow's feather placed carefully on my pillow while I was outside watching a sunset. Something was coming up my tower at night. Something that was quiet and stealthy and was leaving me these strange, ritualistic offerings. I was no longer at peace. My sanctuary had been violated. I started locking the trap door that led from the stairs up into my cabin. But the gifts kept appearing. I would wake up, and there would be a new object on the catwalk, outside my locked door. A string of dried mushrooms, a snake's shed skin, a small polished animal skull. It was impossible. The only way onto the catwalk was through the cabin, unless the visitor wasn't using the stairs. One night I decided to watch. I pretended to go to sleep, but I sat in the darkness, my eyes fixed on the glass walls of my cabin, my heart a cold, tight knot in my chest. The moon was full, and the landscape below was bathed in a pale, silvery light. Hours passed. The only sound was the wind, a low, mournful sigh around the steel legs of the tower. And then I saw it. It was coming up the side of the tower. It was not climbing the stairs. It was climbing the steel latticework itself. It moved with a slow, deliberate, and utterly silent grace. It was not human. It was long and thin and pale. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending at impossible angles. It moved like a spider, like a praying mantis. It was a thing of sticks and shadows, a creature of impossible anatomy. As it got closer to the top, I could see its head. It was small and round and featureless, except for two large, dark, and deeply intelligent eyes. They were the eyes of an owl, eyes that seemed to drink the moonlight. It reached the top of the tower and pulled itself onto the catwalk with a fluid, boneless movement. It was completely silent. It stood there for a moment, a tall, thin, pale silhouette against the starry sky. And it looked at me. It looked right through the glass, right into my eyes. It knew I was awake. It knew I was watching. I was paralyzed with a terror so absolute it felt like my heart had stopped. This was the watcher. This was my silent nocturnal visitor. It moved along the catwalk, its long, thin limbs making no sound. It stopped at my door. It had something in its hand. It bent down and placed its gift on the wooden planks. Then it stood up, gave me one last, long, unblinking look, and it simply stepped off the edge. I scrambled to the window, expecting to hear a crash, a scream, but there was nothing. It had just vanished into the night. I waited until the sun rose, my body shaking, my mind a wreck. When the first light of dawn hit the catwalk, I unlocked the door and looked at the gift it had left. It was a small, hand-carved wooden figure. It was a crude but unmistakable carving of a man. A man sitting in a small, glass-walled cabin on top of a tall steel tower. It was a carving of me, and in the chest of the small wooden figure a hole had been carefully, precisely burned. I finally understood. The gifts were not gifts. They were messages. They were a form of communication, the quartz crystal, the nest, the feather. They were a language. And the carving of me with the hole in its chest, that was a warning, or a promise. I had to get out. I radioed my supervisor. I told him I was sick, that I had a family emergency, that I had to come down. I lied. I couldn't tell him the truth. Who would believe me? He was reluctant. But he agreed to send a relief person in 2 days. 2 more nights. I had to survive 2 more nights with the watcher. That night I did not sleep. I barricaded the trapdoor. I sat in the center of my small cabin, my back against the wood stove, my hunting knife in my hand, and I waited. He came as I knew he would. I saw his pale, stick-like form ascending the tower again, a silent, graceful nightmare in the moonlight. He pulled himself onto the catwalk, and he began to circle the cabin, slowly, patiently. He would walk the perimeter, his long, pale face with its huge, dark eyes appearing in one window, then disappearing, only to reappear in the next. He was inspecting his trap. He was examining his specimen. He did this for hours. A slow, silent, and maddening patrol. And then he stopped. He stopped at the window right in front of me. We were separated by only a 1/4 inch of glass. He raised a long, thin, 3-fingered hand and he placed it on the glass. The glass did not break. It began to ripple, to soften, as if the heat of his touch was melting it. The glass began to bulge inwards, stretching, thinning. His hand began to push through, not breaking the glass, but passing through it, as if it were a sheet of water. I screamed and scrambled backwards, away from the window. The watcher's hand was inside my cabin. It was reaching for me, and then a sound saved me, the crackle of the radio. It was my supervisor's voice doing a routine late-night check-in. Black Balsam. This is dispatch. Everything okay up there, Ben? The sound of the human voice, the intrusion of the outside world seemed to startle the creature. Its hand retracted from the glass. The glass shimmered, and then became solid again, as if nothing had happened. The watcher gave me one last long and deeply disappointed look, and then it stepped off the catwalk and vanished into the night. I answered the radio, my voice a choked, trembling whisper. I told my supervisor I was fine. He didn't believe me. He said he was sending the helicopter for me at first light. The next night, the last night, was the worst. The watcher did not come. The silence was absolute, and it was more terrifying than his presence. I sat there waiting, knowing that he was out there somewhere in the vast dark woods below watching me, knowing that he had almost gotten to me, knowing that he had failed. The helicopter arrived at dawn. I have never been so happy to hear the sound of a machine in my life. I was flown back to civilization. I quit my job. I never went back. I live in a city now, a city with no tall buildings. I cannot stand heights. I cannot stand being in high places where I can be seen from a distance. I have done research. In the folklore of the region, there are old, half-forgotten stories of a creature the Cherokee called Tsul-Kalu, the slant-eyed giant. A tall, thin, ancient being that lived on the highest peaks, a silent guardian of the mountains. They said he was a watcher. They said he would sometimes take an interest in a particular person and would watch them for years from a distance. They said he was lonely, and that sometimes he would try to take a companion. I am no longer a fire lookout, but I know that I am still being watched. I can feel it, a cold, patient, and ancient gaze from a place of great height. I have moved across the country, but it makes no difference. He is not bound by distance. Sometimes I find gifts on my apartment balcony, a perfect white stone, a single black feather, a reminder, a promise. He is waiting for me. He chose me, and he is patient. He knows that one day I will seek out a high, lonely place again. I will be drawn back to the silence, to the solitude. It is in my nature, and when I do, he will be there, sitting in the darkness, watching and waiting to finish what he started. He is waiting to collect his prize.